The goblin economy is in a terrible state, so I thought I'd give them a hand by building a tiny farm for them to raid. A barn sounded like a good place to start, and when I was looking for references, I found a scan of an old White Dwarf guide to building a barn for Warhammer Fantasy. Now, I am kind of getting up there in age and nostalgia hit hard, so I decided to build something along those lines, but simplify it so the build is more accessible to beginners. The original was foam core and balsa wood. We're going to go with cardboard, coffee stir sticks and matchsticks. I am going to sculpt some tiny details with milliput, but if that's not your speed, I will also give you alternatives for them too. Creating a model building boils down to 2 steps. Make a box and make it look interesting. There's an infinity of ways to do those 2 things, but let's keep it simple and work through it. To make a box, we're going to need 4 sides and a roof. I made mine by drawing them out on food packaging and cutting them out, but I also made templates you can download and use as a guide. Whichever way you lay out your templates, you'll need to cut them out, and the easiest way to do it by hand is to use a metal ruler and make several passes with a knife. The door and window have interior corners, which can be tricky to cut out cleanly. In this case, it doesn't really matter if they're messy because we will cover them up later, but it's good to practice. What I do is nick the corners along the line to make a stop cut, and then I slice from the corner towards the center before I repeat on the other side. This way you get a nice clean cut that doesn't overshoot the line. To connect the sides, I use painter's tape to temporarily join the corners together. We will remove this later, it's just to keep everything in place until we have it all glued down. Since the cardstock is very thin and flexible, it's going to want to bend and might belly or cave slightly. The length of the building, where we have the 2 sides with the pointy bits, will be okay, because once we have the roof in place, the ridge will give it a lot of stability. The width of the building, where we have the door and the opposite wall, could use some support, so I cut up 2 pieces of corrugated cardboard to use as supports. These have the same profile as the side wall. Corrugated cardboard is strongest along the corrugation, and I want to reinforce the walls from side to side, so I made sure that the corrugation is running horizontally here. To glue these in, just apply some glue to the vertical edges and slip them into the frame. You may need to apply some pressure until the glue sets. Bear in mind that you cannot make playable interiors if you build like this. I am not a fan of playable interiors, but keep it in mind if you want to do that. You'll need to support your building in a different way. Next, we're going to glue the walls together. I use small tabs of card, just cut little rectangles, score them around the middle and glue them in the corners. I usually put 2 in each corner, 1 at the bottom and 1 near the top. However, you will want to put more if you have a very high wall. You'll know if you need them as the sides will try to open up. Once the corners have had time to cure, you can glue on the roof. I usually apply glue to all the contact surfaces, tape it down and then add tabs like we did with the corners. When the roof has been fully glued in, you can peel the tape off the corners. At this point, I like to smear a little PVA into the edges. This is probably redundant since we'll be covering it up, but it helps ensure that the edge is solid. While I peel the tape off the roof, let's have a peek at another way of building this. My friend Chris Bynum is building a barn of the same White Dwarf article I mentioned earlier. His method of construction uses 2 layers of foam core, 1 for the structure and 1 for the texture. Since this is thicker, it should work out better for you if you want a playable interior. Okay, now we have a box. Now we have to make it interesting. To texture mine, I used coffee stir sticks with the rounded ends cut off. Before I show you how to do that, let's glue a piece of card over the gap for the door. This does make the door a little recessed, but since the card is not very thick, it doesn't make all that much of a difference, and you can skip cutting it out completely. Just remember to leave space for the door when you're texturing. To glue the sticks, smear glue over an area of the wall and start putting the sticks down at an offset. Don't worry about lining them up exactly with the top and bottom of the wall. It's a lot easier and more precise to trim them later. Here you can see me leave a space for the door frame. It would have been a lot easier to put down the frame first, but eyeballing the space you need is good enough. Normally it's enough to slice the excess off with a blade, but for some reason the sticks along the bottom of the building were not cooperating and I ended up chiseling them flush. The sticks along the roof were a lot more manageable and came off easily. This is what they usually behave like. The door frame is made of 3 extra long matches. You'll need to measure and cut the top one beforehand, but the other 2 can just be dropped into place and trimmed later. To make the double door, I cut 10 coffee stir sticks to length. These fill the area exactly and I wanted a little gap between the 2 doors, so I filed down the end on 2 of the sticks. I marked the ones that I filed with an X so I could see which ones they were. It doesn't matter where you put them on each door, but I wanted to make sure that each door had one, otherwise it would look a little off-center. The doors as they stand are a bit boring, so I cut and glued more sticks to them to look like reinforcements. The White Dwarf barn has a hoist, which I liked, though it looks kind of wonky as you wouldn't be able to get anything through the window with it in the way. Instead, I chose to put my hoist above the window. This is cut from two pieces of matchstick, a straight one for the arm and one with two 45-degree cuts for the support. You'll want to lightly file the cut ends with some fine-tinted paper before you glue this into place. It helps it sit better. To make the shingles for the roof, I drew a grid on a thinner cardstock, 1 cm by 5 mm, and cut it into strips with my knife. Then I cut the individual shingles with a pair of scissors. This method of shingling takes a while, but I like the look. However, I'll show you another way as soon as we're done with it. I glue the shingles in rows, starting from the bottom of the roof and working up. You'll want to offset them and overlap them a little, but there's no need to worry about precision. A little roughness looks good. To cap the ridge of the roof, just make some double-length shingles, crease them down the middle and glue them over the ridge. The thing with card shingles is that the edges can delaminate when handling, which isn't great. To harden them a little, I used some very dilute PVA glue and painted it all over them. My reasoning is that the glue will soak into the shingles and reinforce them. This is not something I tried before, so I will need to observe it for some time before I know it's made a difference. If all this looks like a bit much to you, there is an easier alternative, demonstrated again by Chris. This is the same way the roof of the original barn was made. Each row of shingles is a single strip. It's just not cut all the way through. Personally, I like the extra texture from the individual shingles, but if you have a lot of buildings in each other, the difference would be a lot less obvious. Before I painted this, I wanted to add a couple of door pulls to the door. This time around I used milliput to sculpt them. I squashed tiny balls of it onto a piece of plastic card and used a wet sculpting tool to flatten them out and remove the finger marks. Then I used a pencil to make a hole in the middle of each one. Once they had cured, I rolled up tiny tubes of milliput and gently pressed them over one part of the ring, and carefully blended them in. Once they're set, you can pop them off the plastic card quite easily. Making these can be fiddly, and if you don't mind slightly larger door pulls, I have a video about how you can make them from wire and paper. Just need to warn you, it's an old one, so the quality isn't great. Whichever way you make your door pulls, you'll just need a dab of super glue to put them into place. If you have a slightly larger blob, you should have enough working time to correct the position. I also made a little horseshoe to go over the door, and glued it in the same way. That's all the extra stuff I wanted to put on the building, so now it's ready for painting. I started it off with a black base coat from a rattle can. I sprayed both the inside and the outside, as I wanted to make sure that anything you can see from the window is covered. Painting this is very straightforward. I started with an overbrush of brown on the wooden parts. You don't need a full coverage here, it's okay if some of the base coat is still showing through. I added some very diluted green here and there, especially around the bottom edge. This will barely be visible now, but it will give an interesting undertone later. The shingles were painted ultramarine blue, mixed with black. Here we're just going for a nice flat coat. Next, a quick grey dry brush over everything. Shingles, wood, literally everything. To finish off, I repainted the metal bits in black. I don't like to use metallic paints as they can be a bit too strong, so what I usually do is lightly draw on the metallic bits with an HB pencil. The graphite gives the paint a metallic sheen, and I think that looks better. Once all the paint was dry, I gave the whole thing a couple of layers of spray varnish to protect the paint and lock the graphite in place. The inside got varnished too, as that helps protect it from humidity. And we're done. A barn by itself doesn't make a farm, so I will be making other structures to go with it in the coming weeks. In the meantime, if you want to check out how to make the tiny handcart, check this video here. Bye!